Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again for a Help Hope Live Hope Talk. My name is Sunny Mullen. I am the Director of Outreach with Help Hope Live. It is just 3 o'clock here on this gloomy Thursday afternoon in Philadelphia. And so I'm going to give everyone a minute or two to join, and then we will get to the introductions of our wonderful panel. Thank you again for joining. Hopefully you are in the right place. We are here for the Help Hope Live Hope Talk on the transition from hospital to home after injury. So again, we'll let some people join us and we will get started very shortly. Thank you guys so much. Some more housekeeping while we're waiting. We'll just let some people know. We do have a Q&A that is monitored. So if you have any questions during the Hope Talk, you can put them in the Q&A, and we also do have a chat function that is available if anyone would like to chat back and forth. So wherever you put something, we have it monitored. We are here to answer your questions. The recording of this video will also be made available after this fact. So thank you to everyone joining. I think since we are now after 3 o'clock, let us just get started. Why not? We have a lot to talk about and only an hour. That's not that long. So I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful panel today. We have Kelley Simoneaux, Josh Basile, and Ed Hoey, and I will let them introduce themselves a little further. So I'm going to start with Ed Hoey. Ed, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure will. Thank you for inviting me, Sunny, and everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share my insights with you. My name is Ed Hoey. My son Patrick is currently 21 years old. He was injured last year in the summer, July, the end of July. He has a spinal cord injury. He was a C5 fracture in a diving accident. And we, as a family, we have Patrick is our oldest of 4 children. He has 3 younger sisters, and my wife and I both live here with him now. He was a student starting his junior year at Penn State, and so obviously, this was a very dramatic change in our lives. And, I'm very happy to have been invited to share at least my learnings and our perspective of what our experiences have been like in this transition period. And I would say we're still in transition. It's only been about 8 months now, but anything that I can do to help give back to this wonderful community that's been giving to us from the minute this happened, I'm happy to do so. I'm delighted to join. Thank you, Sunny, for inviting me. And I'm so happy to be working with such a great panel too, Josh and Kelley included. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. Josh?
Hey, Sunny. It's good to be here today. And Kelley. I'm Josh Basile. When I was 18 years old, I went on a family vacation after I finished my freshman year of college. I was in the ocean, and a wave picked me up and threw me over my boogie board and slammed me on my head. And that day I shattered my neck. I became paralyzed below my shoulders. I was medevaced off the beach to a critical unit. Was on a ventilator for 5 weeks, and then spent 2.5 months in a inpatient hospital, and then I transitioned home. And ever since then, I've been trying to learn as much as I can and give back as much as I can. So I always like to tell people after becoming a spinal cord injury, I became an advocate for life, but at the same time, became a mentee and mentor for life. So today is kind of that ongoing talk of kind of that journey from the early days to getting home and for the future. But it's probably one of the most important pieces of the puzzle of people's journey of the transition from hospital to home. And it feels like a mountain, but we'll talk today about those steps of going 2 feet forward, 1 step back, and just keep moving forward. But thank you, Sunny, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josh. And I am here to absolutely give credit to Josh because he is that advocate, and I have witnessed that firsthand. So I really do appreciate you being here, as well as Kelley Simoneaux for joining us yet again in one of our series here with this Help Talk. Thank you so much, Kelley. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Kelley Simoneaux, and I'm based in the DC area. I'm a proud board member of Help Hope Live, and my journey to being part of this community is I was in a car wreck when I was 16 years old. I was a passenger in the back middle seat of an older vehicle that only had a lap belt, and so when the car hit a tree, it flung me forward, broke my back, and I became a very textbook paraplegic. I was born and raised down south in East Tennessee and was fortunate enough to be able to go to Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and have my intensive inpatient rehab there, and then went right back to my community in Tennessee to start learning how to live life again. And so now today, 23 years later, I am a mom to 3 kids. I am the owner of a law firm, and basically every part of my life touches spinal cord injury, from my work to living life. And so it's really important for me to be able to surround myself by people like the people on this panel and that you joining who are part of this community, because we really are all so much stronger together. And there's no reason why we should all be constantly recreating that will, learning from one another as we are on this journey together.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. So to get things started, the title of this Hope Talk, transitioning from hospital to home. So the first part of that is clearly after all of the injuries that were experienced by either yourselves or your loved ones on this panel, how long were you actually in the hospital for? What was that timeline even like for any of you? Kelley and Josh, for those of you that experienced it firsthand, what was that timeline for like?
I was in the hospital for 2.5 months. It was from early September to mid-November. And it was one of those periods of time where it's where I started learning how to speak spinal cord. Everybody that ends up having a spinal cord injury is a member of the spinal cord community. And it's a very unique community that we start speaking the same language. And in inpatient hospital, it's like, looking back, that was probably the best spinal cord education I ever could receive, because every day I woke up to the second I went to bed, I was surrounded by professionals, nurses, doctors, you name it. They were at my bedside, all my therapists. I was just surrounded by SCI professionals. Time learning everything I could before coming home was key. Being able to document it, take videos, making sure that every single thing that was in there to keep me, it kind of teaches, it's your almost your college education of spinal cord injury. It teaches you the tools of the trade to survive in the real world. So really learning everything you can, I can't emphasize that enough, was the most important part of those days in the beginning. And there's a million other conversations we can have, but I'll throw it over to Kelley to share a little bit about her experience.
So I was injured on February 2nd, and I returned to my high school on May 2nd. So 3 months to the day. I had the first 2 weeks in an ICU setting and the last 2 weeks in an outpatient setting. And in that middle portion, approximately 2 months of that was spent at Shepherd Center, inpatient, in the rehabilitation setting. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of times our timelines aren't dictated by our own timeline. It's dictated by the powers of insurance, and certainly fighting for every day you have. But one thing I feel very fortunate about was I came into the inpatient rehab setting a very broken person, quite frankly. My mouth was wired shut. My whole face had been shattered. And so I was covered in a turban. My head had been shaved. I had a back brace on. My mouth wired shut means I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't really talk. But having a rehab understand that those days were so critical and so limited that they needed to get up and have me doing as much as I could, even with the state that I was in. At the time, I was like this is overwhelming. This is so much. Like my body just, how can I'm literally, pieced back together at this point. But I'm so thankful now that they were getting me up, putting me in therapy, even in those early days, even when I had so many other things going on, because it set me on that trajectory to where, I could return. When I went back home, I was immediately able to make that transition back to what I wanted to do, which was to live life.
That's amazing. And Ed, kind of adding on to that question, from the parent perspective, first and foremost, how long was Patrick after his injury in the hospital? But then when did you guys get that discharge date? And how, from the parent perspective, were you then dealing with the home side of things and accepting those realities?
Yeah, I think, well, just a little historical. So Patrick was in the ICU for about a week, and he was very fortunate that he was able to, achieve his ICU goals, including blood pressure stability and all these really, really critical things, just to make sure that you're not at risk, for a life-threatening event. And then through a number of just wonderful fortunes, we were able to get Patrick from the ICU directly to McGee Hospital in Philadelphia. So he was injured up in the Finger Lakes of New York. It was at Strong Memorial Hospital in New York. So for us as a family, we basically uprooted and went to Rochester for that time. But our goal was to get him to inpatient rehabilitation as soon as possible, because I think to what Kelley was speaking about, from the minute we got there, we knew that every minute was precious, and that every day we were focused on learning as much as we could to, with that impending discharge coming, to try to do as much as we could to learn his care and to prepare. And we advocated to try to keep him at the hospital as long as possible. We were able to basically have him extend his stay by a few days at the end, but ultimately it was only about 8 weeks. And I feel like we would have loved to have him stay longer, but I think that we had a great transition plan to day rehab or day hospital, which was an extension of his care. So there was a lot of continuity from the therapist planning and things. So that really worked well. And I think, one of the other things that really was in our favor in our situation is that we had two parents that were heavily involved, which, as we were talking about earlier, I think that if you can advocate for help and have people that can be, available to help you, support you through that transition, it's so important. Because I was managing things at home while my wife was there at the hospital for a good portion of the time, trying to learn his care and try to advocate for his care, and also encouraging Patrick to take ownership and advocate for his care. So it's still an ongoing plan. He still does rehab and things like that. So from an inpatient perspective, it was only about 9 weeks, but every minute was precious, and we were so grateful to have the amount of time that we did.
And talking about that planning, sorry, Josh, did you have something to add to that?
I was just going to piggyback a little bit off of what
Go
Ed
ahead.
was saying, and specifically kind of like when you're in that inpatient setting, the person that has the injury, it's so important to kind of focus on kind of both healing your mind and body through focusing on what you can do rather than what you can't. I was on a ventilator for the first 4 weeks of my injury, and I got off of it. I was able to get weaned off of it. And I try to focus on every breath and make every breath count. And, whether it was, exercising my lungs through a straw and blowing different things on a table, to doing different spirometer exercises, to shrugging my shoulders, like every little thing. There's probably a million things I couldn't do, but there was a lot of little things I could focus on. So, for the person that's injured, they become physically paralyzed, and kind of healing through that, but also not letting the physical paralysis and depression that can come pretty fast take you down mentally. So those are like some of the big things to focus on as the patient. It's important if you can, like SCI community and family, friends, and support teams. Like it takes a community for someone with a spinal cord injury to live their best life. If that person doesn't have to worry as much on that transition home and all those other pieces of the puzzle, that take place to get that person there and to make that home ready. It's a big thing, but not everybody has those supports. So it's important to recognize when they don't have the supports, being able to give them a chance to get home or in the community again with some type of structure. But I just wanted to kind of piggyback off what Ed was saying, and it's incredible that you know, having incredible parents and teams to get you home. It's very important.
Absolutely. Well, another piece of wisdom that you had shared with us earlier, Josh, was in that planning is to plan for the most challenging situation and then just be happy when maybe you don't need those plans. And so just the amount of planning, and in that vein, and Ed, some of what you were talking about with the planning of going home, how early did you even start thinking about going home or start planning about going home? Because you're from the parent perspective, you are doing that planning while Patrick is healing his mind and body.
Yeah, I think, you know, I wish I had thought of it sooner. You know, but you know, the first week or two or three, you're just in such shock of, you know, what has happened, and you're just trying to grasp, you know, all the emotional aspects of dealing with a spinal cord injury. But I think that, you know, the environment of the hospital, to Josh's point, you know, surrounds you with a healing environment. And I think, you know, leveraging all these experts, you know, and Patrick was able to participate in art therapy. He was able to participate in music therapy. So the healing is somewhat holistic, or can be holistic in the hospital. Whereas when you come home, you don't necessarily have all these wraparound sort of supports. But so building a network of support while you're still at the hospital, and being able to do those things at home to prepare, getting organized, arranging living spaces, all these sorts of things. I mean, there's dozens of questions that come into your mind of, you know, how do I prepare for being home? And I think, you know, starting to answer those questions, the most fundamental questions, as early as possible. When will I go home? How will I get there? Even things as simple as that, let alone what you're going to do once you get there. Those things, if you can start at least identifying what those are and getting answers, that will help make the transition easier. And as you cumulatively build a plan over time at the hospital, hopefully by the time you get to home, it's not going to be perfect, but some of those fundamental things are set, and you can make a safe transition and feel like, you know, okay, maybe your bathroom isn't remodeled yet, but at least you know where you're going to lay your head and how you're going to be cared for, you know, and who's going to do it.
Absolutely. And Kelley, in that transition, what were you preparing for as a 16-year-old going home, and how was that transition? And even what do you feel like your rehab did or maybe didn't do to help you help your family? What are some of those takeaways from that transition?
I think no matter what your age is, when after you sustain a spinal cord injury, oftentimes the goals of rehab of the people in the rehab setting differ from what your mind's goals are. And for me, I thought a goal would be to get up on braces, but my reality as an Asia A complete paraplegic was that while there are benefits to it, functionally, that wasn't going to really get me very far once I got out of the rehab setting and into a home and life setting. And so I had to really change or be forced to change my perspective of what my goals were. Luckily, once I really started thinking, I mean, I was 16. So one thing that was of incredible importance to me was, how would I drive? How can I please drive? Let me drive. That once I got in my mind that there were ways to make those adaptations so that ultimately those goals could be met at home, it really propelled me forward and in a way that got me very focused on what all I could achieve once I got home. I think one of the things, living a spinal cord injured life as long as I have, one of the challenges you have in the hospital setting transitioning home that unfortunately doesn't change the rest of your life is accessible housing. And the reality for all of us is that we most likely are not living in in a house that's very adaptable to a wheelchair when you become spinal cord injured. And then, for me now living on, like finding housing, buying a house that I can make adaptive to my needs is unfortunately still a challenge. But in those early days, like, we don't have a house that you can return to, or without some kind of modification. So identifying, like, how do we get back? How do we get you back? Like, I had a bedroom on a second floor, and there really wasn't a plan or a structure that made sense to put an elevator in our home. And that certainly would take a certain amount of time. So it's like, how do we put a piece of wooden, let's put a wooden ramp up first, because we don't know what the ultimate entry point of this house is going to be. And then where can we put a bed that, I can get into, and end up being in a sunroom on the first floor of our house. And then, kind of moving through those steps that ultimately we had to make, reconstruct our garage into an accessible bedroom, suite, bedroom, bathroom, 0-step entry, way. That was what our ultimate conclusion was, to make, accessible housing. But it was like a lot of renditions of that until we ultimately got to that moment.
Yeah, that's Ed. I was going to ask you that as well, because we had talked about the home modifications. You guys were doing that planning while Patrick was still inpatient. But then once he comes home, did any of that have to change? Because clearly then you have to make it actually usable and not just it's adaptable.
That's right. Yeah, I think, we were fortunate that we had accessible space on a first level of our house, but it took major renovation to, kind of make it amenable for a power wheelchair. And, we started the process probably the second week he was in the hospital. And we were very fortunate that family friends had a contractor who was very understanding and done ADA remodeling. But even still, like any major construction project, it took multiple weeks. And Patrick was home and sort of living in an environment where he didn't have a bathroom yet, and we just had to make do with, our sort of hygiene as we could until we were ready for the bathroom. And I think that as far as like preparing the house, there's so many simple fundamental things you have to think about. Are the doorways wide enough? We live in an older home, and I went around and measured every single door to make sure that that the wheelchair would fit through the doors, because you have to plan routes of entry and routes of exit. Other things, for example, very simple things like a threshold. Can you get over a threshold in a power chair? And those sort of things were, stuff that we worked on, pretty much as soon as possible. And even still, we're still working through some of those things. Here we are months later. But I would say, though, that's again where, calling on friends, family, an extended network of people who have done this before, who maybe can help you. And maybe there are parts of your community where, there's maybe carpenters or someone who can come and help and build a ramp or something like that to make the house accessible. But it definitely is a challenge. And I think that, the earlier you get the mindset of that you're going to have a place to live. How do I put that together, and who can I rely on to help me get it there? So it was a really, really important thing for us too.
Yeah, just so many details like that, and things that you wouldn't even think to imagine, like the thresholds or if the doorway is wide enough again. And I know you had mentioned to us before that you were modeling his home modifications off of what he was already using at McGee. So McGee was helping you prepare for what he might need.
Yeah, I think, that was to Josh's earlier point too, trying to gain as much information and knowledge out of the environment that you're in, that it's so prepared for patients with injury like spinal cords. We actually, our contractor even went to visit Patrick at the hospital because he was a family friend, but also went in with his tape measure and measured sink heights and things like that, which, and what we tried to do is, as much as possible, try to simulate the environment that Patrick was in at the hospital, so that we could create as an open space, and knowing what kind of storage, because there's a tremendous amount of storage. You wouldn't think about it, but when you're at home, there's a lot of supplies and things you need. So having a place to keep all that stuff, having, things of accessible, enough electrical sockets, all these sorts of things that you don't really think about the details. And I think, looking at the environment that he was in really helped us to prepare for that, because it allowed us to think about how do you position in a bathroom? How do you have access to a faucet? All these things that you take for granted when you're not in a wheelchair. So I would encourage, during that time of planning for home too, take a look at what's working in the hospital, equipment, supplies, environment, and try to replicate that so that when you're home, you have some success and you have accessibility to all the things you need. Turning on a faucet, something as simple as that.
And Josh, what was your going home journey like as well? Because like Kelley and Patrick, really, you were a teenager. And so there's that mental aspect of being a teenager. And unlike Kelley, you weren't going home to be able to drive. And so you were dealing with a lot mentally and physically in that transition from hospital to home.
And going home it was one of the weirdest feelings. I've never wanted to stay in a place longer, but also leave a place more. Like, I felt so comforting knowing that I had 24/7 nursing care at the hospital. So if anything happened, I was going to be cared for. And then going home to a place where it's going to just be my mom and dad, and we're able to get a caregiver to have 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the evening, and have that kind of surrounding us. But I remember when I did leave the hospital being terrified. And especially because I was weaning off, I weaned off the ventilator months prior, but then I had a trach and I was just getting off the trach and going through those nights. And I remember wheeling up into my garage and seeing old tennis rackets and soccer cleats. And just, it hit me then more than ever that life was going to be different from that moment on. And so that it became real. And it just, coming home, and it was so much quieter in the house. And it wasn't always, a million different people running different directions within the hospital. And, it was a new routine, or a new normal that I had to get used to. But I was so grateful that from day one of my journey, I didn't have to do it alone. Being a lone wolf in the spinal cord community is a very scary proposition, and it's a scary world of isolation. But being able to welcome beautiful people into your life, first within the hospital systems to learn from the social workers to be able to give you the tools and resources you need. The mentors, I had mentors that came into my life in the early days that gave me hope and told me, I could follow in their wheel tracks. I had somebody that ended up getting injured in the beach 10 years prior to me, went to the same critical unit in the same hospital system, got home, went to community college, undergrad, law school, fell in love, got married, and had kids. And I was like, you know what? If Tim can do it, I can do it too.
I was gonna say that story sounds familiar.
Yeah, the next 20 years of my journey was following in Tim's wheel tracks, because it gave me confidence to learn from others. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And especially it's probably one of the biggest motivating factors in my life to create my nonprofit, Determined to Heal. And we have Spinalpedia now, that we have a national peer mentoring program that we get into hospital systems. We get into inpatients, we get into critical units. So anybody on this call that has a program that needs to be able to have touch points with community members. We have over 10,000 community members, but myself, I do one-on-one times with families. A lot of times it's with their families during the inpatient days until somebody with the spinal cord injury is ready to chat. I'm always there if they are during the inpatient. But I hope that answered your question a little bit.
No, it absolutely did. And I had forgotten that we had that conversation about seeing the tennis rackets and all of that. And I think Ed too, from Patrick's perspective, he was an active college student. And he had to much like Josh, he is, coming home and not able to pick up those rackets and all of that. So what was his transition? And then from the parental standpoint of you guys seeing that?
Yeah, I think, again, there's so many facets of an injury like this, because it's so sudden and it's so dramatic and catastrophic in so many ways that, everything, it's like a reboot, so to speak, or a recalibration of, first of all, what's important. You become so grateful for just the fact that, your loved ones survived this event, and that there is potential, no matter where you're starting, that, as long as you're alive, there's potential, and that, with the right support and, hopefully some gifts from God, you make good progress and you're able to rebuild. And I think, that I think is one of the hardest things, is that you have to, over time, as a parent, accept that what your vision was for your child, or what your expectations, or what your notions were for their future, are going to be different than what you thought they would be. They were going to be anyway. They always were going to be different, because people are who they are. But I think, in our case, Patrick, for example, was really dedicated to golf, and he was having an excellent season of playing golf prior to his injury. He had been a varsity diver in high school. He was about to start his junior year at college in his business major, and very excited for that. He was living in an apartment with friends, and I think all of those things are it's such a dramatic transition away from what you think your life is going to be.
Yeah.
That to me is a heavy emotional process that you have to work through. And you can't try to think about it all at once. I think, one of the mantras that we had is that, it's 1 minute at a time, till it's 1 hour at a time, till it's 1 day at a time. And you have to always focus on the future, because you can't change what happened. You can't change the injury. You can't go back and say, well, if I'd done this or I didn't do that. And it's hard to do that. It took us a lot of effort to consciously begin to focus on the future. But I think, things like when you see the tennis rackets or the golf clubs and stuff, or when you hear from your friends who are at school and they're going out to the parties and things like that, those are the really tough times for him, and that's what I observe. Those are I think the hardest times, where, you have to think about, kind of your old life compared to what your new life is. But I guess the consolation is that you have the new life, and the potential's there, and it's going to be different than what everybody thought it was going to be, but it can be amazing.
Yeah. And Kelley, how was that? I know, like, you mentioned you wanted to go home and you wanted to be able to drive, but within 3 months you were back at school, in high school of all places, which can already be a challenging enough environment, let alone coming back from a spinal cord injury. How was that transition?
Well, again, I mean, when you have a spinal cord injury, you start thinking very practically at some point. And so it's not even like, while certainly it was crossing your mind from a teenage girl, like, what are my friends going to think about me and all that. But, I needed to be able to get in the door of the school. And unfortunately, like there were some accessibility issues that had to be addressed in order for me to even be able to return. And luckily we had people in the rehabilitation process that were helping us identify, like, where will Kelley be returning? What's the school look like? Because one of the greatest things that, while inevitably would become my life, where I show up somewhere and it's not conducive to my new life as a wheelchair user, you certainly don't want those immediate things that you're going to have those challenges. And so whether it's returning to an office or returning to a school or whatever space that is, you at least want to, like, have those initial planned places you'll be carved out, so it doesn't make things so overwhelming. And so there was only steps entering the front of my school, which is where all the parking was. And so then it was a matter of where would there be an accessible parking spot that Kelley could hopefully ultimately load and unload her wheelchair. I didn't return to school driving myself, but fairly soon after, I did, by the time I graduated, of course, really before that, that next year. But and then could she get in the door? And then where was her classrooms? There was a wing that had stairs only. And where was she going to be? She was returning to those same classes. And so it wasn't that, maybe the next year when she started back to school, we can make sure to plan. And then also,
were you a part of those conversations as well, since you were still relatively young, but what was your involvement in that?
Yeah, so luckily, you know, the school did bring me into the conversation, or rather the people helping me facilitate it from the rehab setting knew that it was very important for me to be, as you're becoming your own advocate, to not be cut out of those conversations, because you know, me having awareness of what those discussions are and how I need to be a part of that, getting back into school, you know, that was going to be me maneuvering those everyday, you know, journeys, while my parents were certainly a huge advocate for me. Luckily I was brought in, just to be aware of what needed to be done. And also I was in school while I was in rehab. I had a teacher in rehab, so I could, you know, go back. And when I went back to school on May 2nd, I was, you know, expected to be back in that academically, just the same.
Yeah.
I was physically having to go back into that same space, but I was academically returning to that same space. And while there was, you know, that catch up period, I was taking final exams, and I, you know, I was able to keep up so that when I was able to progress with my class. And so the school had to learn to accommodate me, how to get in the building, how to make sure I was kept up with my schoolwork. You know, I did have one teacher that refused to give me an A because she said I wasn't there that semester to fully earn it. But aside from that one teacher, you know, like everyone helped kind of facilitate that that transition. So because I was motivated, and you know, I remember I ran for class president for my junior year from the hospital bed at Shepherd. You know, I was ready
That doesn't
to get
surprise
back.
me at all.
But I was
That's
like, I
amazing.
just like, those were like the little things, like
Yeah.
people around me could see what was motivating me. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think we all have to take whatever our motivations are and like go with it. And for me, it was
Yeah.
like, let me get back there. I don't want to, you know, miss a day. Like even back
That's
before
awesome.
FOMO was a thing, like I had FOMO. I wanted to be a part of everything. So I was ready to get back.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, Josh, I know you really are a big advocate about learning and the resources. Obviously, you created Spinalpedia for just that reason. What are some of the major things that you learned in that inpatient setting that you have taken with you through your time now that you are a father and a lawyer and a business owner? And what has gotten you to this point, maybe, that you think you could actually track back to that inpatient setting?
It's just, I think it's been said today about how this injury kind of hits the big reset button. And so much from the early days, I learned the power of advocacy, the power that nobody's going to fight harder for me than I'm going to fight for myself. So I got to learn everything I can. I've got to create an atmosphere or approach to life where I'm willing to try, I'm willing to be creative, I'm willing to see that a barrier is not the end, but just another path to get over it, around it, or through it. So like, I say this all the time in other webinars and things I do. Just before my injury, I did things 1 million ways. After my injury, I do 1 million new ways, 1 million different ways. It's just those 1 million new ways can still be meaningful and fun and impactful. And it can bring you on a pretty incredible journey if you're willing to get out there. So in the early days, really just learning to find my voice. You know, having my voice taken away from the ventilator, you know, I wanted to have that back. I was tired of communicating through blinking once for yes and twice for no. Like when I found my word, when I found my words, and when I did come home from the hospital, I had a former teacher that was in my life, and she took me back to school. I went to community college, and the first class that we did together was a poetry class. We just took one poetry class, and that semester, I did physical therapy. You know, I literally was probably exercising 35 to 40 hours a week and took one poetry course. And that poetry course helped get so much that was on my mind, both, you know, what the future would look like, the now, and having to be able to have that emotional strength and that mental game to be able to tackle life. And I think that poetry class really did help me come to terms with my injury and also paint a picture of what I wanted my future to be like.
That's beautiful.
So that was big for me.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And just finding your voice, obviously that seems to be the biggest theme here, and community. And Ed, I do want to come back to you with community, because I do know firsthand you have a very strong one. And that is what brought you to Help Hope Live in the first place. And with all of that planning, one thing selfishly I will plug, I would be remiss if I did not. Help Hope Live is here to help you fundraise for all of your expenses, all of these expenses that can help you get home from the ramps and the cars and the home modifications. And how did that even happen for you, Ed?
Yeah.
Like, because you've talked about the home modifications and all of that, but what made that possible, and what even, got us together?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just being willing to accept help, to be receptive when people say, we want to help, how can we help? Let them in. We, found out about Help Hope Live because of our community. And, right away we knew that, if, God willing, Patrick would have a very long life, but that he would probably have some level of needs no matter what. And that we wanted a plan for his future. And that's what it was. It was a focus on the future. And, having the stress of worrying about what his care needs are and how do you, do the best that you can with whatever means that you have. Some of that burden is taken away by generous people who give to support those medical needs that are going to be there. And I think, being willing to, sort of expose yourself to, you're being very public about some very private and very emotional feelings, things that you're dealing with in your life. But, I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking how our experience with opening up has only compounded this feeling of immense gratitude to the kindness of people who really want to help because they feel it in their heart to do so, and they're good and kind people, and being able to accept that help and be grateful for it. It's been transformational for us as a family. And I think the foundation, for example, is a really great example of that. There's so many people that are doing fundraising for our family, and people that we've never met are making generous gifts, because there is so much compassion out there in the world, and it's not necessarily the sort of the sad, desperate place that it may appear to be, with the negativity here in the media, that there's actually really a lot of good people. And to Josh's earlier point, the community of spinal cord injury is a small community, but has incredible resources. So you just have to reach out, and one thing I would say is my wife has not only reached out personally to people she's interacted with and met so many wonderful people that have supported us, but also through the social media environment, and through, access points there. There's a lot of really amazing resources out there and experiences that people are willing to share. They're going to share some intimate things about their lives, but it really is for the good of the community. And that's, I guess, the message is, try to embrace as much of the support that people are willing to offer, because there's such an amazing group of people out there, people on this panel, people on this call included.
And how early on, because I think we were linked up with you guys, I feel like within a week of his injury. So
Well,
how
yeah,
early on were you starting to fundraise?
Yeah, we started the process very early. Friends of our family had a similar experience with a spinal cord injury, and I think Patrick he might have actually even still been in the ICU, and someone said, there's a lot of people who, really want to try to help in whatever way they can. And monetarily, it actually really does help, because what it does is it provides a safety net. Because there's a lot of times not much that someone can do. I mean, you can't, as a friend and neighbor, you might not be able to, necessarily help someone in their rehab, but you can help them give them access to maybe supportive care, or uncovered medical needs for rehab or therapies or equipment that might not be covered through insurance, but that might be really important for outcomes and progression in their therapy. So, for us, we started very early, and we've, like I said, been very grateful to have a wonderful friend community that have continued to do fundraising. And again, we've relied on that. One of the fundamental questions that we had was, how are we going to get home? How are we going to get to and from doctor's appointments and therapy? And the reason why we're able to do that, and the stress and burden of worrying about that, was taken away because we had a lot of people donate to Help Hope Live, and they supported us in buying a used van from Mobility Works, who were wonderful to work with, by the way. So,
Yeah.
that took away a tremendous burden, and it gave us a lot of confidence in getting to and from treatments and things like that. So, so fundraising has been really, really important.
Can I,
Yeah,
can
and
I
it really,
piggyback?
yeah, go ahead, Josh, absolutely.
Just unfortunately, a spinal cord injury is the most expensive injury anybody could ever choose to have or have. And every dollar that can go to our quality of life really does open doors. It creates independence, and it creates a safer future to be able to survive and thrive in the community. And in the early days, Ed said it so truly, like, community and friends, family, and people that are behind you, they want to help, and they can't always, do those little things to physically help you, or to be able to help with the day-to-day grind of a spinal cord injury. But there's all those other pieces of the puzzle, and having medical fundraising, especially through a nonprofit with tax deductions and other elements that can come within that, it's a perfect recipe to really get behind somebody, and then to share your journey, where you were from the beginning to the next month, and letting people be a part of that. People have big hearts. They want to give, they want to be a part of something, they want to change lives. And there's no better to change a life than to be a part of the journey and through that fundraising part, because those dollars matter. And getting that vehicle, getting that ramp, getting that elevator, getting your home, all the different pieces of equipment, like, there's so many things that you need, whether you're a paraplegic or quadriplegic, to be able to access the world and live safely in the community. So it's what Help Hope Live is doing and has done has changed lives and changed families. So I'm very grateful to be on this Hope Talk and to just be a part of this, be a part of what we're doing together.
Thank you, Josh. And really, we are nearing our end here. And before I get into my last question, I do see that we have one question here in the feed. Want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or into the chat. So Ed, someone did ask, what kind of help do you guys have at home? Does Patrick have caregivers? What is his day-to-day like? And I don't even know that we mentioned the fact that Ed and your wife are both nurses even. And not to say that that factors in, but there is that parental side, and then your nursing side maybe help a little as well. But
yeah, I think, again, it's just a weird, fortunate situation for us that my wife and I both are nurses, and that, we had at least a foundational understanding of how to care for someone with a spinal cord injury. But I can tell you, even as a nurse, even in working in clinical practice, you're not prepared for the personal and intimate and complexity of caring for someone with a spinal cord until you do. And everybody's different. And every patient has varying needs, and they change over time. So for us, my wife and I have been able to be his primary. She's his primary caregiver, and I'm sort of the adequate backup, I guess you could say. But I think, he also has very supportive younger sisters, two younger sisters that live at home here, who also help, with some of this additional support, because there's so many things, and not just the physical care, but it's also the sort of wraparound care, basic things like, maintaining the house and meals
Yeah.
and laundry and all that kind of stuff. So, we're very fortunate that we have that level of support here in our home. But I got to be honest, my wife took a leave of absence from work, and, we were able to do that, but we've been pursuing, trying to, through the process of government support, trying to get additional help.
Mhm.
And we're fortunately getting to some progress there, where we hopefully will be able to have some additional support care to be a relief, because it is encompassing, and it
Yeah.
requires 24/7, and we need to make sure that, to Josh's point, that all the care needs are met, and that that we have a safety net of people, because God forbid one of us is down and out. My wife had a minor illness the other day, but it
Yeah.
was kind of a reminder, hey, listen, we need to build additional support networks here. So we've been the primary caregivers, but you rely on others, and we're actively thinking about who that can be and how we can do
Mhm.
that, because even though Patrick does have some function with his arms and hands, he still requires a lot of care, and we want to make sure that we head off any issues long before they happen, and that happens through good care. So
Absolutely. And from a practical standpoint, what what kinds of devices or any equipment at home does he have that's helping
yeah.
him in his day to day?
Yeah, so he's a power wheelchair user. We did a complete renovation of our sort of mudroom, powder room area to create a very accessible bathroom. And what we did is created a barn door slider to essentially an open room with a roll-in shower. He has a kind of a large family room that we converted to his sleeping area, where he has his bed, and he has an elevating desk and things like that. And he
Mhm.
also has a television set and other things. And then we're working to try to get a standing frame as a piece of equipment that
Mhm.
we'll have at the home. He still is fortunate that he has coverage and continues to go to therapy several days a week. Although his PT is ending soon, he still has occupational therapy. But again, this is a place where fundraising will help. We can
Yeah.
supplement therapy if it's not covered by insurance. If he still has goals and needs, we can supplement. But the modifications of the home took several months, but now we're kind of in a good place, so to speak, and that we're looking to add some additional things as we need to kind of keep his therapy goals being met at home. Additionally, I'll mention the things like we put up some draperies to divide off rooms and things like that, to
Mhm.
also give him some element of privacy. And those things, have helped a lot. But he uses a Hoyer lift, he uses a shower chair. We have a lot of storage for his supplies and things like
Yeah.
that. An elevated sink, a very open sort of floor plan. Lots of electrical outlets, lots of zip ties,
Mhm.
lots of like smaller assistive things.
Yeah.
Because that's again where I would go back to, while you're at the hospital, look at all the things that sort of support success there, and try to
Mhm.
replicate those things at home. Height levels,
Yeah.
accessibility, all those sort of things.
Nice. And as we're winding up, I don't know that I see any other questions at this point. I just want to ask, especially Ed, from the parent perspective, do you have any other lasting words? That sounds so major, but nothing,
Yeah.
even from, was there one major thing outside of, we've talked about finding community and finding your voice? Is there one nugget that you would tell someone at this point
Yeah.
about this transition and what you can do?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would say is that, it is stressful. No matter how prepared you are, you'll never feel like you're really prepared. Um, but I would say, as much as possible, try to rely on support, um, and be kind to yourself. Really think of
Mhm.
this as a journey, that you're going to continue to learn. There's going to be some mistakes, but you're always focused on the positives and focus on the future. If you can stay focused on the positives, focused on the future, celebrate the very small wins along the
Yeah.
way, and know that it's temporary, and that you're moving forward, and that's the goal, to continually move forward and try to focus on the positives.
Thank you. And Josh and Kelley, I know you guys advocate and peer mentor and are fielding phone calls every single day from newly injured individuals. As we wind this up, what are you telling people when you're on the other side of that phone call? What is that nugget of advice you're giving individuals who are newly injured or maybe are on their way home that we can hopefully leave our audience with today?
I will say from like a medical clinical perspective, a lot of what was unfortunately like relayed to me at the very beginning was a lot of this stuff I wasn't going to be able to do. And that really, struck me very hard because in my mind, I was even thinking, even as a 16-year-old, of the ways that I was going to be able to pivot. But when like a doctor came in to just tell me, you'll never drive, you're never going to dance again, you're never going to do this, and that list was growing, and this was in like the very acute stage, but
Yeah.
but that was a really daunting thing to process. But what I found is that living a very full life is very possible.
Yeah.
And you come home from the hospital with a lot of just stuff. Like for me, as a paraplegic, coming home with lots of different equipment and sliding boards and many pieces of things that at one point were a tool. Luckily, one thing I was able to find for myself personally was that little by little, those things kind of went out the door. And I was able to kind of simplify my life more and more and more. I had a person that was a peer mentor while I was at Shepherd tell me that, oh, I just transfer to the bottom of a bathtub and take a shower. And I was like, what? That's a crazy thing. How in the world would someone do that? And as it turned out, I lived in a condo for about 2 years where I was doing the same thing. It went in the spectrum of my injury. And I was like, you think back to those early moments when people will tell you things that seem so impossible, and then you find yourself living like that. And so things do, you find your groove, and you find the things that really can, you're going to make a lot of pivots, a lot. You're going to redirect many, many times, but often it leads to an unexpected but a very fulfilling path. So,
Thank you. And Josh, what do you generally, because I know you are on the phone all the time with newly injured and their families. What are you telling them?
I like to make sure that they fully take away that they're not alone, and that they're stronger and more united with people surrounding them, community members, and that it can be that lonely journey if you have to do it and alone. But it's like one of the biggest things is just to learn from others, to learn how to do things, but also learn from others to how to avoid mistakes. And so much of in the beginning days when I work with family members, because there's a path I take with newly injured for people that have this spinal cord injury, but the family members, getting them into government support programs if they're needed is life-changing. And being able to navigate that and play that game of doing it, it's every state is a little bit differently drawn up, but knowing how to do it and do it right, and then not making sense. Like you see families do GoFundMe campaigns, and the next thing you know, they've raised money, and that money actually kicks them out of government programs. But then being able to know you can do a Help Hope Live campaign to avoid that mistake. That's one of the big things I say to every single family. It's you got to get dollars to your quality of life, but also you got to get into government support programs to make sure you can get those supports and how to get in those programs, but both for Medicaid purposes, then for Social Security purposes, if you can access SSI, if you can pull an SSDI from work history or a parent's work history, or if there's a death in the family. There's all these little things that really create that foundation to be able to move forward in the best way possible. So the earlier I can get to families, I feel like I have a bigger ability to change their life in a better, straighter path. Because it's just the first year I remember for me, I was zigzagging every which way, but every time I bumped into a different mentor, I felt like I was going a little bit straighter, or having a different resource, I was going a little bit straighter. So just welcome people in. You have a million unanswered questions. Let's try to find those answers, but really letting people matchmake you to the right people, the right supports, the right mentors. That's really where you can change someone's life.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think we can end it there in respect to all of this wonderful advice we've gotten. If we were not able to answer your question, or if you have something more specific that you'd like to ask us, by all means, please reach out to us at outreach@helphopelive.org. We will be posting this recording on our YouTube playlist. We will be doing a follow-up blog post because there is still a lot of information out there. And we are all, and I think I can at this point speak for all three of our panelists, they are willing to share any expertise that they've learned throughout their lives, whether it's been a year or 16 to 20 years. So we appreciate all of you and your ability to share and add to this community that we have formed here at Help Hope Live. And we appreciate you all letting Help Hope Live be one of those resources in your transition from hospital to home. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully we will see you next time when we come back to you with another Hope Talk on a wonderful topic relating to our community. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks.